Ye Gods by Tom Holt. Chapter 14. Well then, Jason considered his options. He had, within the space of a relatively short time, defied the gods, been to hell, beaten up the driver of the spoil and the Grim Reaper, been made to feel about 12 years old by his mother, discovered that he had free will, discovered that, on the contrary, his entire life had been planned out for him from the start by the personification of laughter and an eagle. Acquired a 3-headed dog, mislaid a 3-headed dog, been taught most, but not all, of the funniest joke ever, routed a divine army, spent a long time in his worn shirt pocket, and tried without success to murder a game show host. More or less, the only thing he hadn't done in the last few days, in fact, was have a decent meal. But there is that within a man that drives him ever onwards, just as the power of the seasons drives the roots of the flowers into the hard earth, and so he decided, against his better judgment, to open his eyes and find out what was going to happen to him next. He was, after all, a hero, whether he liked it or not, and when he'd been offered the choice between the path of luxury and the path of glory, he'd chosen the path marked diversion. Although he was no expert, he had an instinctive feeling that that came under the heading of asking for trouble. Anyway, he opened his eyes. So, he looked around, and the first thing he saw was sandwiches. Ham, beef, cheese, sardine and prawn sandwiches. Also pork pie, a plate of sausage rolls, 2 Cornish pasties, and an iced bun. "This," said the voice above his head, "is not a bribe." "No," Jason replied, torn with indecision. "Of course it isn't." It had been difficult, but he had made up his mind. To start with, the beef. "And since it is not a bribe," the voice continued, as the sandwich jackknifed out of his hand and skittered away like a frightened kitten, "it would be best if you didn't eat any of it until you decided on your verdict." "I just did," Jason said. "I thought the beef first, and then a bit of that pie, and then—" "About the future of the human race." "Oh, that. Oh, well, I know for a fact that some of them aren't allowed to eat beef or pork, so they really won't mind if—" "About whether the gods should be allowed to destroy laughter." Jason remembered. It'd be nice when there was just the food to think about, but clearly his destiny, the world's destiny, and the destiny of the beef sandwiches were all somehow interlinked. How, he had no idea, but that was all right. He'd never claimed he was Marcus Aurelius. Ah yes, the world. He considered the matter with the small area of his brain not mentally eating beef sandwiches, and after a short while he delivered the following judgment. "Well," he said, "if that place, or world, or whatever you want to call it, that I saw just now was what the world would be like if the gods did away with comedy, then I don't think a lot of it, and personally I wouldn't like to live there. On the other hand, I wouldn't like to live in Florida, but a lot of people are very taken with Florida, and who am I to say they're wrong? I mean, one man's meat. Ham, beef, pork, chicken, turkey, veal, lamb, sausages. One man's meat," he forced himself. "Salami, dear God, was there anything in the whole of creation as wonderful as a salami and mozzarella salad with fresh white bread on the side?" And he forced himself to continue. "It's another man's poison and all that. I could just fancy a poisoned meat casserole as it happens, but never mind. What I'm getting at is... Are you still there?" "Yes." "What I'm getting at is, will there be any mustard? Eventually, I mean." "Quite possibly." "What I'm trying to say is that I refuse to make a judgment one way or another. I know what I want and what I do, but I'm blowed if I'm going to lay down the law to anybody else. Please stop me before I finally drift over the edge into complete incoherence, but I don't hold with deciding things for people. My dad does that, and I don't respect him very much for it. I don't think it's right to decide what other people's lives are going to be like. Personally, when I think of the hash browns, corned beef hash, the cock-up I've made of my own life, I can't really say that I'm in any position to shape other people's. By the way, exactly why is all this up to me anyway?" "Because." "I might have guessed. Well, if you want me to decide between you and the gods, then bearing in mind all the experiences I've had over the last few days, what I've seen of you and the various insights I've had into the way gods go about things, and also bearing in mind the fact that Jupiter has always bossed me about, and apparently you've been manipulating me ever since I was born, and I always seem to find myself doing what my mother tells me to do, my decision is that I choose whichever side will make it possible for me to eat all of this food at the earliest opportunity. Satisfied?" "No. Like I said, it's not a bribe. More a sort of, what's the word? torture, that's it, until you make up your mind and reach a decision, citing good reasons you can't have any. Now, get on with it." Jason scowled, and with the speed of a cat pouncing on a trailing ball of wool, hurled himself at an Eccles cake, which promptly scuttled away down a rabbit hole. "Are you Prometheus?" Jason asked. "I am," Prometheus replied. Jason looked round. He had no idea where the voice was coming from. "Where are you?" he said. "I can't see you."
"I'm not surprised.
Why's that?"
"You're not looking in the right direction."
Jason scanned through 360 degrees. Nothing. Well, lots of sandwiches and pies and pasties and cakes, and he noticed a black forest gatto and some cheese straws, which he'd previously overlooked. He loved cheese straws. Not that he was adverse to cocktail olives, crisps, cashew nuts, Ritz crackers with little bits of fishy carnage on them, and baby frankfurters, and right now he could eat the stale bread left out for the birds. Yes, lots of food, but no Titans of any description whatsoever. "Why me?" he asked. "Because will not be acceptable as an explanation."
"Why not?"
"Because it's meaningless and patronising and—"
"No,"
Prometheus replied.
"Why not is the answer to your inquiry. Now, if you don't mind coming to a decision."
"No."
"The pasties are going cold."
"I'm not hungry."
"Now, look here."
"No." Jason folded his arms, and there was a scream of pain and terror. He looked down and saw Prometheus in his shirt pocket, pinned to the wall of his chest by a gigantic forearm. He quickly removed his arm and apologised. "What on earth are you doing in there?" he added.
"Damn you, Jason Derry," said the diminutive giant. "Why must you always be asking questions?"
Calmly, Jason lifted Prometheus out of his pocket and sat him down on the palm of his hand. "Because," he replied. "Now, either you can tell me what's going on properly this time, or else you can be put between two slices of bread and eaten. The choice is yours."
"Where are you going to get 2 slices of bread from, then?"
"I can do without bread," Jason replied, "at a pinch."
"It would be cannibalism."
"Very probably."
"I taste horrible."
"How would you know?"
"I can't explain what's happening," Prometheus said furiously, "until you've made the decision."
"I can't make the decision," Jason shouted back, "until you have explained."
"What's so difficult, for crying out loud?" Prometheus shrieked. "It's us or them! Don't you understand?"
"Which is which?" Prometheus didn't reply. Instead, he tucked his head between his knees and started to hum at the top of his voice. Jason swore, and then put him gently down on a slice of anchovy toast, which immediately lifted into the air like a magic carpet and whisked him away into midair. It was then that Jason came to a decision, and the decision was that he'd had enough. He stood up, and as he did so, he became aware of something round and hard, like a cricket ball in his trouser pocket. It was uncomfortable, and so, without looking at it, he pulled it out and hurled it away with all of his strength. Doing that was meant to make him feel better. It did. Much better. "Oh," he said. "I see."
"I thought you would."
Prometheus was standing beside him. "Hello, Prometheus," he said. "You've grown a lot since I saw you last." And indeed he had. He was now about 8 feet tall and still going strong.
"And what do you see?"
said Prometheus. "Hang on," Jason said. He made a sideways lunge at a cream horn, which stayed very still and let him catch it without a trace of a struggle. He ate it. Served it right. "Now then," he said, licking cream off his upper lip. "What do I see? I see that the thing I just threw away was the world I was just in, the one where there were no jokes and the gods were in control. I see that I threw it so hard that it's shortly going to punch a hole through the wall of the space-time continuum and vanish forever."
"Very good,"
Prometheus said. He snapped his fingers and a guided eclair hopped up from the ground and piloted itself neatly into Jason's mouth.
"What else?"
"I see that I subconsciously decided to do that because I don't hold with gods. They exist all right, but there's no point in encouraging them. They're quite big and strong enough to take care of themselves. As it is, they run the world as a huge game, scoring points for all the horrible things they trick us into doing. But it's we who do them, of our own free will, if you'll pardon the expression. They just persuade us into it, like Dad persuaded me to be a hero. Nah, stuff the gods, and the only weapon we have against them is laughter, because once there is laughter, then nobody, however serious-minded or humourless he may be, will be able to take a bunch of clowns like Jupiter and Minerva and Mars and Neptune seriously for more than 5 minutes. Am I right?" By way of affirmation, a sausage roll hopped up onto his shoulder and slid down his chest into his hand. A moment later, a salt cellar appeared, running frantically along and puffing, late as usual. On the other hand, laughter itself cannot rule the world because it is a force of anarchy. Did I just say that? Where do I pick these expressions up from, I wonder? It's a force of anarchy and cannot assert itself or exert authority. You can dissuade people from invading the country next door by making jokes, but you can't make them do it. Thus, Skelos can never rule. Actually, said Prometheus, as a doornut snapped himself into two and one half floated towards Jason's face. You've got the right conclusion, but for the wrong reason. Hence only half a donut. But do please carry on. Finally, Jason said, I make this decision of my own free will, and I'm the only person in the history of the world who can because... Hang on, that can't be right. Don't think about it, Prometheus urged. Look, have some profiteroles. Profiteroles, like chocolate sauce-drenched cannonballs, obligingly bobbed in the air in front of Jason's eyes, but he ignored them. Nah. But seriously, Jason said, a couple of pages must have fallen out here or something because... Stay with it, Jason, Prometheus said, and don't talk with your mouth empty. He turned to make some impatient gestures at a cheesecake, which had overslept and was now dashing towards them, yawning and struggling into its kiwi fruit as it ran. I make this decision of my own free will, Jason repeated slowly, and I'm the only person in the history of the world who can because... Look, just say it. Because it's fated. Now just look here, will you? There now, Prometheus said soothingly, between sighs of relief. That wasn't so bad now, was it? Have a peach Melba. Jason shook his head angrily. I don't want a peach Melba, he snapped. I want an explanation. Oh, don't start all that again. How can I have free will if it was fated all along? It was fated that you should have free will, Prometheus replied. Brandy snap. Bugger brandy snaps, Cream slice. Stop drivelling away about food and tell me what it means. I don't object to revelations as such, but I do insist on them being intelligible. I mean, how would St. Paul have felt if someone had popped up on the road to Damascus, thrown him off his horse, and then said the cauliflower is mightier than the hairdryer? Apple donut. There was a long silence. What did you just say? Would you like an apple donut? Look! 2 apple donuts with fresh cream. Prometheus shuddered slightly. Of course, he said. Nature held its breath while Jason thought about it. After all, it wasn't as if it were entirely logical, was it? Everybody else is predestined, but it is foretold that one day a hero will arise who is able to choose for himself. Apple donuts. Oh, sod it, yes, why not? Since you're offering, Jason said. Yes. Yes, what? Yes, please. That's better. Prometheus nodded to a waiting spirit who haired off to Plato's ideal world to borrow a couple of apple doughnuts. Luckily he got the last 2 and he returned. Not bad, Jason said, licking his fingers. Is that it then? Not quite, said Prometheus. Instinctively, Jason made a grab at the nearest plate, but missed by 6 inches. The food was playing hard to get again. Don't try to fight it, Prometheus advised him. Think how embarrassing it would be, going out to dinner and having the prawn cocktail leap out of the glass and hide under the sideboard until you've gone. Everyone else would be wondering which fork to use, and you'd be scooping in yours with a butterfly net. If this is your idea of helping me stay unbiased and impartial... Prometheus laughed. Blow that, he replied. You've made the decision. Now we need you on our side for the actual fighting. Ah, Jason said. Fighting. Didn't I mention the fighting? Not in so many words, no. Well, Prometheus said, when the gods find out that the world that they had such high hopes for has been kicked into touch and is now entirely beyond their reach, there is a material risk that they might feel rather upset. Particularly, Prometheus added, as they have now sworn to destroy this world so they can move everything and everybody into the other one. You know how it is with gods. Once they've sworn to do something, then it's just got to be done. Balls, Jason replied. Prometheus shook his head, startling a flock of lemon meringue pies that had pitched in a nearby tree. You're thinking of promises to mortals, he said. That's different. I'm talking about a promise Jupiter has made to himself. He can't break that. Can't he?
No. So you see, there might actually be quite a bit of fighting in the not-too-distant future.
Prometheus paused for a moment.
That'll be nice, won't it?
Will it?
I'd have thought you'd have been pleased, the Titan replied. You're a hero. Heroes like fighting. It's what they're good at.
That doesn't always follow, Jason replied. My mum's cousin Henry is a dentist, and people are always saying how good he is at it, and then he doesn't enjoy it at all. Sometimes I think that's that way with me and my heroism.
Nonsense, Prometheus said firmly. You'll enjoy it once it's started, I'm sure. And besides, you aren't supposed to know the meaning of fear.
Actually, Jason confessed, I looked it up in the dictionary. Came as quite a surprise, really. I always thought it was some sort of large bird.
All right, Prometheus said impatiently. I should have said you know no fear. Now can we?
Maybe not fear, Jason interrupted, but acute apprehension and blind panic I can manage quite easily. It's just practice after all, and these last few days... Just then Jason felt something cold and wet against the back of his hand. Something cold, wet, and tripartite. He looked down. Hello, Cerberus, where have you been? He started to ask, and then he noticed that Prometheus was staring at the dog with a look of combined loathing and horror. Normally, Jason wouldn't have thought anything of it, since he knew a lot of people who reacted to dogs in precisely that way, but Prometheus hadn't seemed the type. He looked again. In one of his 3 mouths, the dog was holding a small, blue, green and brown sphere that seemed extremely familiar. Oh, hell, Jason said. He hasn't, has he?
Prometheus nodded. Looks like it to me, he replied in a hoarse whisper. You threw the Betamax world away. Fido here has fetched it back for you. Oh, hell.
The dog, sensing that man's best friend had cocked it up again, laid his ears back and wandered over to the shade of a boulder, where he proceeded to lodge the Betamax world between his front paws and chew it. Jason and Prometheus looked at each other.
We'd better get it back from him quick.
By we?
Don't stand there arguing the toss. Get the bloody thing.
Jason shrugged and reached for the surface-to-air Scotch egg. It shied away. Jason started to protest and Prometheus apologised.
What are you up to, though?
Canine psychology, Jason replied. I'll also need a Bakewell tart and some sausages. These were provided, and Jason wandered over to the boulder, sat down and started to eat. A moment later, the dog was sitting beside him, giving him that wistful, pathetic look that all dogs seem to have in common. Then it opened its mouth to make the quintessential doggy hopeful panting noise, and of course the Betamax world rolled out of its jaws and trundled along the ground. Prometheus swooped down, picked it up and shoved it inside the front of his robe. Jason popped a foodstuff into each of the 3 sets of jaws, collected the Betamax world and let fly. For the record, the Betamax world didn't leave the space-time continuum at all. The friction it encountered on leaving the Earth's atmosphere set it alight, and it soon degenerated into a comet. Given its unique genesis, however, it did not behave exactly as other comets do. That is to say, it combined the regularity of trajectory, which is characteristic of comets, with the innate cussedness of all divine or semi-divine artefacts. For the rest of time, therefore, it circled through the galaxy, turning up with remorseless regularity exactly when it was least expected. In any event, it ceased to be a Betamax world, and that was just as well, because no sooner had it left Jason's hand than the sky darkened and the sun made a dash for the safety of a dense cloud bank, pausing only to glint significantly on the spear tips of the vanguard of a huge divine army making its way rapidly towards the surface of the planet. Religious revivals have been endemic on the number 1 world ever since the gods retired and went to live in the sun. Nobody is exactly sure why. One view is that mankind has a desperate need to believe in something, preferably something so blatantly absurd that only blind, unquestioning faith will suffice. For example, the belief which sprang up in the late 19th century and was still widely current in Jason Derry's time, and which held that human beings were not in fact created at all, but were somehow the descendants of bold mutant monkeys. The other view is there is never anything much good on television during the summer. Never, though, has there been a religious revival as sudden and as widespread as the one which followed Apollo's first broadcast to the world. Perhaps it was simply his magnetic charisma.
Apollo, after all, looked like a young Greek god, had a particularly appealing smile, and a way of looking into the camera as if it had been the camera he had been searching for all these years. Or perhaps it was simply the fact that what he was saying happened to be true. In any event, no sooner had he left the studio and wandered out into the car park to reclaim his chariot than the entire world suddenly decided that it had seen the light. Those who had seen the broadcast immediately went and told those who hadn't, and, being human, threatened to burn them alive if they didn't join in. So quickly, in fact, did the revival gather momentum that half an hour after the broadcast, not only was there a high priest of Durham, but he was on TV asking for money. Another aspect of this revival that made it different from most of its predecessors was the fact that although the gods were now universally believed in and revered, they were also intensely unpopular. Apollo had not pulled his punches. He had made it perfectly clear that the gods were not cuddly. There had, of course, been religious protest groups before. One thinks automatically of the Guild of Merchant Plasterers Against the Crucifixion, which enjoyed a brief prominence during the English Civil War. But none of them had expressly set out to believe the gods into oblivion. That, however, was what Apollo had achieved, simply by stating that it was ordained that if mankind truly had faith, the gods would not be able to achieve their intended purpose. There was an oracle in precisely those terms, he had said, which was, of course, perfectly true. As the god of prophecies, he had seen to it personally. The eagle came swooping back just as he had got the winged horse back into the traces of the chariot. "Well?" Apollo asked. "Absolutely," the eagle replied. She had been sent to check that the broadcast had achieved the desired effect, and had just flown round the world in 37 seconds. "It's worked like a charm." "Are you sure?" "No problems," replied the eagle. "Everybody's singing hymns and sacrificing like it was going out of fashion. If I was a white ram now, I'd be very, very scared indeed." "Fine," Apollo said. "Look, do you have to do that?" "Do what?" "Sharpen your beak against my spoiler. I've only just had this chariot resprayed and—" "Sorry," said the eagle. "Would it help if I assumed human form?" Apollo remembered that he had seen the eagle in human form not long ago. "Yes," he said. "Why not?" The eagle became Mary and sat in the passenger seat of the chariot. She adjusted the rear-view mirror and examined herself in it. "The trouble with being an eagle," she said at last, "is it does terrible things to your skin. It dries it out. It'll take 3 days and a mud pack to get rid of these lines." "What's going to happen now?" Apollo asked. Mary looked at him and giggled. "I don't know, do I?" she said. "Who do you think I am? God Almighty." Apollo frowned irritably. "You seemed to have a pretty good idea just now," he said, "when you were telling me what to do. If this is some kind of practical joke—" Mary assured him that it wasn't. "If it was a joke," she said, "the last thing it would be practical. Now, I know what should happen now, of course, but there are no guarantees." "What should happen then?" "Jupiter," Mary said, "should set out to destroy the Earth. Halfway down, he will be met with a surge of faith in an essentially non-violent, ecologically aware carbon copy of himself who wouldn't willingly uproot a dandelion if there were any way of avoiding it. All this faith will get right up his spine and he'll be forced to pigeonhole the entire project." "Fine." "Well, up to a point, fine," said Mary, powdering her nose. "The difficulty will be that he'll be very much aware that he wants to demolish the Earth, but he can't. And this may make him resentful. And from what I can remember of the faith mechanics I learnt at college, there's nothing to stop him taking it out on someone in a big way, just so long as that person doesn't happen to be a planet. If I were you," she concluded, closing her powder compact with a snap, "I'd be distinctly edgy." "Me?" "You," said Mary. "I don't want to worry you, but you are directly responsible for thwarting him. He should be arriving any time now." Apollo looked up at the sky. There was a thick bank of black cloud moving in from the east and another from the west. Although he wasn't to know it, there was in fact another contingent trying to get in from the north, but it had got held up in a contraflow system over Finland. "What can I do?" he said. "Try and be dignified about it," Mary replied. "Well, it's been nice. Ciao." "Hold on," Apollo said, grabbing her by the wrist. "Oh, don't let's start all that again." Apollo blushed furiously. I didn't mean that," he said. "I mean, you've got me into this, now you'd better—" "Nothing to do with me," Mary said. "God said free will, remember? And now I really do have to be going." "Where?"
to meet the others, Prometheus and Gelos and the Derry kid. So if you just stop crushing my wrist for a moment, I'll be getting along."
"Let me give you a lift," Apollo said. "Actually," said a tiny voice at the back of Mary's mind, in a part of her brain that she had recently only used for operating some semi-redundant feathers on her left wing, "he's quite good-looking, in a way, for a god. Nice smile."
"All right," she said. "Head for the Caucasus."
"Why?"
"That's where the others are. Come on, hurry up."
"We'll be safe there." Mary considered this for a moment.
"I always think safe is such a terribly subjective word, don't you?"
"What word do you choose, then?"
"Conveniently situated."
Oh, Apollo hesitated, his hand on the ignition key. The starter motor system had been one of the trickiest parts of the whole conversion job, and Vulcan had finally managed it by wiring the starter motor up to an electrode fitted to the lead horse's rump. When you turned the key, it gave the horse a very severe electric shock. Being a divine horse, it was supposed to understand by that the driver wanted to be taken somewhere. But even divine horses can only stand so much of that sort of thing before they start lashing out with their hind legs. Fortunately for his peace of mind, but Apollo wasn't mechanically minded and hadn't yet considered how the thing worked. "Conveniently situated for what?"
"For a good view of the battle, of course."
Apollo was firmly of the opinion that the best view of a battle in which Jupiter was on the opposing or less friendly side was from the other side of space and, if possible, time, and said so. Mary replied by taking what later turned out to be a small, sacrificial dagger from her handbag and pressing it, not unkindly, into the small of Apollo's back.
"I'm hijacking this chariot to the Caucasus," she said. "You know you're immortal, but maybe I'm not convinced. Shall we go now?"
Apollo considered for a moment and then turned the ignition key. "Are you sure you know what you're doing?" he asked.
"Yes,"
Mary replied confidently. She was by inclination a truthful person, so it was for the best, she reckoned, that he hadn't asked her if what she was doing was sensible or not. One of the leading drawbacks to travelling to battle in the heart of an inky black thundercloud is that you get very wet indeed. If you are carrying an ample supply of lightning bolts, there is also the risk of a serious short circuit. Jupiter was therefore not at his most affable during the journey from the sun to the earth. The captain of spectral warriors, who had interrupted his light lunch with an inquiry about the possibility of overtime payments for the forces of darkness, it being daytime, and who was now buzzing sadly along behind the host in the shape of a small bee, was generally considered to have got away with it lightly. Minerva, as officer in charge of destruction, northwestern sector, was sitting in her winged dragon-propelled mobile command centre, studying a confused bundle of maps and a dog-eared copy of Baedeker, when Mars knocked tentatively at the door and stepped in. "Well, Ma, what is it now?" Minerva took off her glasses and looked at him sourly. She tended to be impatient with failures, and the fact that after the previous debacle Mars had been temporarily suspended from his duties at war and put in charge of troop welfare and entertainment made her less ready to waste valuable time on him than she would otherwise have been, which was not very. "If you want me to sing in the camp concert, I'm afraid I'm far too busy." Mars, who had heard Minerva sing, assured her that he quite understood.
"No," he said. "What I really wanted was a quiet word about what's going to happen when we destroy the world."
"We've been into that already," Minerva said, "and I do take your point. But there it is. You can't make omelettes without breaking eggs."
"Don't want a bloody omelette, Min."
Mars gave her a despairing look.
"For crying out loud, we're all going to die in about 20 minutes and nobody seems to care a damn. What's got into you all?"
"We're trying not to think about it," Minerva replied, putting her spectacles back on and returning to her paperwork. "I can only recommend that you try and do the same. Close the door after you, please." On his way back to the welfare office, Mars met Diana. She had been given the post of Annihilation Liaison Officer, and she'd been going round the army trying to find out what it meant.
"I don't know,"
Mars said when she asked him.
"I don't particularly want to find out either. The whole point about knowledge, I always thought, was that you find something out and then you remember it for the rest of your life. In the circumstances, it seems rather pointless, don't you think?"
Diana ignored him.
"I'm a bit worried about Paul," she said.
"Paul?"
Mars stared.
"You're worried about Apollo?"
"Well, he is my brother,"
Diana replied defensively.
"I'm just hoping he's going to be all right."
"How can he be all right?"
Mars shouted. "He's going to die just under 15 minutes according to the schedule. So are the rest of us."
All right. Yes, you needn't go on about it, Diana replied. What I mean is he going to be all right until then?
Mars left her and wandered off in search of the officer's mess. In his opinion, the description fitted the entire enterprise, but the part of it he was interested in was a small, tastefully furnished area selling intoxicants. He finally tracked it down at the southeastern corner of the cloud and went in. The only other customer was Neptune, who was sitting at the bar trying to drown his sorrows. A difficult undertaking for a sea god.
"Sit down, Ma," he said. "Have a little drink. Think we just got time for a quick one." "What are you having?" "I think I'll have a Gorgon's Revenge."
Mars looked at him.
"Are you sure?"
Neptune hiccuped and grinned.
"Course I'm sure," he replied. "It's the only time in the history of the world a man can have 5 Gorgon's Revenges, or an empty stomach, and not have to worry about the morning after. Isn't I?" "Never point there, Uncle Nep," said Mars. "Mate mine the same."
Soon afterwards, the barman brought the drinks, and Neptune, by way of experiment, picked out a diamond from his dress crown and dropped it into the glass. It dissolved.
"I've always wondered what they put in these things,"
he remarked, staring into the glass. The fumes blinded him for a moment.
"Best not to us, so they say," replied Mars. "Well, here's health."
Neptune looked around.
"Where?" "No," Mars said. "It's a toast. Cheers." "Mud in your eye," Neptune answered.
They drank deeply and for a long time were silent.
"I think I'll have another one of those," said Neptune. "Why not?" Mars replied. "That way things can only get better."
The cloud, meanwhile, had smashed its way through a very confused stratosphere and was rushing down towards the surface of the planet. It was just gathering momentum nicely when the prayers hit it. Being hit by a prayer is no joke. The first thing that happened was all the lights went out. When the backup power supply came on, Neptune and Mars found themselves looking at something quite unexpected.
"Here," Neptune demanded querulously, "what are they putting these things?"
A shaft of golden light had impaled the cloud like a skewer through a veal souvlaki. There were a lot of, well, it went against the grain to say this, but there was no avoiding the fact that they were angels. They were also holding flaming swords.
"How do they do that?" said Mars. "I don't know," Neptune replied. "Oven gloves, maybe?"
As if the sunbeam and the angels weren't bad enough, there were other indications that something quite out of the ordinary was happening. There were a lot of quite unsolicited flowers, for example, and the air was heavy with strong, sweet, cheap perfume. Both Mars and Neptune suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to grant requests.
"I don't know about you," Neptune said, "but right now I'm feeling a bit funny. I think I'll just go and lie down for a minute."
Mars nodded carefully.
"Good idea," he said. "Which way is the door?"
Outside they stopped again and stared. Peculiar though the other manifestations had been, this was something else. It was Jupiter. Jupiter standing in the middle of the clouds' parade ground. Jupiter smiling. You could see at once he was fighting it, with every fibre of his supreme being, and the harder he tried, it seemed, the harder it was to resist. The golden sunbeam had got him right in the navel.
"Do you think we ought to?"
Mars's voice strained away.
"Help, you mean?" "Well, yes."
Neptune shook his head.
"Wouldn't do that," he said. "You wouldn't?" "Certainly not," he said.
20,000 years of sibling rivalry blossomed on his face into a grin the size of California.
"That would be blasphemy." "Blasphemy? Absolutely," Neptune replied. "To attempt to assist Jupiter would be implicitly to deny his omnipotence. No, let the old bastard sort it out for himself. I'm going back to the bar." "But, my child!"
Mars shot another glance at the Father of Gods and Men and headed back to the mess tent.
"What's going on, Nep?" he asked. "It's a prayer," Neptune replied, hopping up onto a bar stool and eating olives. "A biggie, too."
In fact, that's the biggest prayer I've ever seen in the whole of my life. And Jupe's got it right to his guts. Champagne! He called to the barman.
Apollo and Mary arrived in the Caucasus just in time to see the cloud grind to a halt, waver, and slowly start to retreat back to the sun. The golden shaft gradually faded until there was nothing left but a little sprinkling of silver filings, the residue of a few inappropriate prayers contributed by members of the Tokyo Stock Exchange.
Thanks for the lift, Mary said. Now you're going to hang around and catch the fun.
Do I have a choice?
Of course you have a choice,
Mary replied, pressing very gently with the small knife.
Weren't you listening to what I was saying about gods having free will?
I don't mean a choice between staying and getting knifed, Apollo said. I don't really call that a choice, do you?
It's what you expect the mortals to put up with most of the time,
Mary started to say, but then she remembered that her mother had told her about not talking politics on a first date. Her mother hadn't mentioned the social effects of digging a small knife into a guy's back, so presumably that was okay. All right then, Apollo was saying, so what's happening?
So far as I can see, Mary replied, the gods have just tried to land and blow the earth away, but all the prayers and faith you managed to whip up have forced them back again. That's it so far as destroying the earth goes, at least for now. In about 5 minutes, I expect Jupiter will be back to kill somebody.
Fine.
Oh, look,
Mary interrupted.
There's Pro and Gell and the Derry kid. I think we should go over and have a word with them, don't you? They might be able to think of something to stop Jupiter killing us all. That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Mary bit her lip indecisively. On the one hand, she knew it was totally counterproductive to go around throwing yourself at people. On the other hand, she had the feeling that unless she gave some sort of hint or indication at this stage, a promising relationship might simply fade away and die.
I don't know if you're wondering, she said, but there isn't anything between me and the Derry kid.
No?
No.
Well, there we go, Apollo said. Do you think you might take that knife out of my back now?
There should be,
Mary went on.
I mean, it was fated and so forth. But what the hell? Just because a thing's fated doesn't mean to say you're stuck with it, does it?
Doesn't it?
As for Pro and me,
Mary went on, finding it all rather harder work than she originally anticipated, but staying with it nevertheless,
we really are just good friends. I mean, what there is between me and Pro is very special, don't get me wrong, but really there's the age difference, the size difference, the species difference. You've got to be realistic about things like that, haven't you?
Ouch! Apollo replied.
Oh, hell, sorry, Mary replied. I'm just so clumsy sometimes, you wouldn't believe it. My mother used to say to me...
Prometheus had seen them and was hurrying over. He looked the same, but there was somehow something different about him. If he had been a tune, he'd be in stereo instead of mono.
Paul, my boy, he shouted. Good of you to come, just in time, too.
Hello, Uncle Pro, replied Apollo resignedly. Look, if I'd known it was all going to get as messy as this...
Don't be silly, Prometheus said. And anyway, everything's going to be fine. We've got the eagle, the dog, and the Derry boy.
Hello, said Jason sheepishly. Meeting new gods for the first time always made him a little bit bashful. Apollo nodded briefly and smiled a tight-lipped smile, and then resumed his search for knowledge. Look, Uncle Pro, he started to say, but Prometheus silenced him with a gesture of his hand.
I know, he said, but there's nothing to worry about. If Jupiter starts getting violent, Jason here will threaten to tell him the joke.
What joke?
The joke, idiot.
Apollo's eyes widened like balloons in the course of being inflated. You mean to say he knows the joke?
Most of it, Prometheus replied. All of it except the punchline.
Ah, but even so.
It's all right. Don't worry, Prometheus replied. I made sure that neither part of the joke would be volatile without the other.
Apollo thought of something. How come you know the joke, Uncle Pro?
Uncle Pro doesn't know the joke, said Prometheus, but I do.
Apollo didn't understand at first, and then the truth dawned on him. He backed away. You mean your
thing?
Yes, Apollo said. Begins with a G on the tip of my tongue.
No, you fool, that's my name, Prometheus snapped. It has pleased me to call myself Gelos and play at being a mere form for a number of years. But in fact, I'm your great-uncle, brother of Cronus and Rhea.
Do you believe me?
Well, yes.
Well, said Prometheus, just in case you don't,
Narrowed his eyes and gave Apollo a good, long stare. Suddenly, Apollo started to laugh until he could feel his lungs straining to bursting point. In fact, he was just about to black out when the laughter stopped as suddenly as it had begun.
Again, for the sake of convenience, Prometheus continued, I am sharing bodies with my old friend Prometheus at the moment. Mines, too. We've always had similar tastes in mines, Pro and I. Haven't we, Pro? Yes, ever since I can remember, except I like mine a bit less cluttered. Well, we won't go into all of that now. Takes all sorts. I was only going to say. Later, Pro. All right? Please yourself, then. Sorry, Paul, as I was saying.
But before he could continue, his head snapped upwards. Apollo followed his gaze and saw something high up by the sun. He recognised it.
What is it?
Mary said.
Jupiter's coming back, Prometheus replied. Right, everyone. Action stations.
What might those be exactly?
Get ready and everything.
I take it, Apollo said, that you do have a plan.
A plan, yes.
A plan of battle, Apollo said. Stratagems and so forth.
Sort of.
And are you going to let us into the secret, or are we... Ow! For pity's sake, woman, mind what you're doing with that knife. You could do someone an injury.
It's all right, Mary, Prometheus said. You can put it away now. Apollo won't desert us at a time like this.
Won't he, though? Apollo turned to make a dash for his chariot, only to feel the beginnings of another big laugh clogging his windpipe. All right, he said. You win.
Let's hope so, anyway, Prometheus replied. Now then, Paul, you and I and Mary and the dog will form the rear guard, and the rest of us...
That only leaves me, said Jason.
The rest of us will form the front line contingents. Ready, Jason?
No.
Here they come.
Strictly speaking, of course, it wasn't necessary for Jupiter to come at all. But if there was one thing the Sky Father loved, it was melodrama. And if there was going to be a big fight, he wanted to be there in person, pitching in and watching the bodies go splat. Sitting in the sun, hurling thunderbolts was a poor substitute, he always felt, for actually getting to grips with an enemy's intestines. His list of priorities was quite clear in his mind. Family first, Apollo and that ungrateful little git Jason Derry. He had something really hot in mind for him. Then, once the first flush of exuberance had worn off and had been replaced with nice, grim resentment, he had sought out Prometheus and that damn eagle. That would leave the highlight of the proceedings, his Uncle Thing, till last. Uncle Thing was the part he was looking forward to most. As he roared through the air like a vindictive meteor, he quickly ran through the fundamentals of anatomy in his mind. A mental picture of his antagonists, with little dotted lines and pairs of scissors drawn all over them, draped itself across the retina of his inner eye and made no effort to get rid of it. Behind him streamed the selected elite of the Divine Special Services Unit. There was no point in cluttering the place up with rookies and idiots, not now that the demolition programme had been shelved indefinitely. For killing Bolshie mortals, you need quality, not quantity, and the forms hurtling earthwards in Jupiter's wake were the sort of abstraction that only a very powerful and extremely unbalanced mind could conceive of. Even he got the creeps just thinking about them, and yet they were merely personifications of the contents of his own head. That was scary. Was he mad? Jupiter asked himself, as he zoomed through the Earth's atmosphere in a cloud of blue flames. He thought it over and decided that, yes, he quite probably was. He only needed to look over his shoulder to know that his mind was so unhinged it was a miracle it didn't fall out of his ear. Ah, well, too late to do anything about it now. And what, Jason was asking, will the rest of you be doing while I'm... And then he saw the flames, and Jupiter at the head of this unspeakable squadron, and realised that he was on his own. Only he could do anything about all this. Fix things so that never again would Jupiter be able to command that the world be destroyed. And why? Nobody seemed to know, because it was fated. Brilliant. There was a screaming sound. It was just the air being torn apart by the violence of their passing, but it sounded much worse. Jason squared his shoulders, drew the sword of I couldn't give a toss what it's supposed to be called, he said to himself. I shall call it Freckles, and took one step forward. He wouldn't mind doing this sort of thing if only people would tell him what was going on. Aye, Dad, he said. Jupiter stopped in mid-air, and the shockwaves caused by his sudden loss of momentum sent clouds scudding across the skies of 4 continents.
Hi there, son, Jupiter replied. You're for it this time?
Am I?
Oh, yes, replied Jupiter. I mean, this isn't your parking in a no-parking zone. This is where you and life part company. Sorry, lad, but there it is.
Oh, well, Jason said. In that case, knock-knock.
You what, son?
Knock-knock, Jason repeated. You meant to say, who's there? Jupiter felt as if the air had given way under his feet.
Now steady on, lad, he said. Let's neither of us get carried away and say things we might regret later.
Say who's there.
Certainly not, Jupiter replied. Got you now, haven't I?
Who's there? Jason said. Cassivellaunus who? And then he dried. Any stand-up comedian will tell you it's a horrible feeling, and when your audience is a sky god with an army of very bad ideas at his back, it can get really hairy. Jason opened his mouth and nothing came out of it.
Go on then,
Jupiter said, folding his arms and tapping his toe on a wisp of water vapour.
Cassivellaunus who? Cassivellaunus who?
Do you know the one about the travelling salesman who goes into this,
I asked you a question, said Jupiter. Cassivellaunus who?
And then Jason remembered. He couldn't say the punchline because he didn't know it. The dog did. He turned, whistled and called, "Here, boy!" as loudly as he could. The dog stayed exactly where he was.
Is that it? Jupiter asked. Cassivellaunus here, boy. I found funnier things in Christmas crackers.
Here, boy! Jason yelled.
Cerberus! Bad dog!
The dog stood there and wagged his tail at him. Then, very slowly, it faded away. Jason turned round and looked at his father. He smiled, and while he did so, his brain was improvising furiously.
Well?
Said Jason. Cassie, the lawn is badly in need of mowing.
What?
You heard.
Cassie, the lawn is badly in need of mowing,
said Jupiter, slowly, relishing every word.
That's it, is it?
And let it be a lesson to you, said Jason. Now, if you've quite finished.
Oh, no, said Jupiter. I haven't even started yet.
The sky god grinned, and for some reason that was the final straw. All the aggravation that had been building up inside Jason ever since this whole tiresome business had started suddenly came to the surface and exploded. There was something about Jupiter just then, Jason decided, that didn't only get up his nose, it went right the way through and halfway down his throat. With a yell so blood-curdling you could have made black puddings with it, he swung the sword Freckles round his head and charged. Jupiter didn't stand a chance. The form standing behind him recognised this before he did, and before Jupiter had so much as raised his arm in a fruitless attempt to shield his face, the slowest of them was ploughing through the cumulonimbus and mortaring nicely. As it rushed sunwards, it could just hear the sound of somebody very large a long way away saying, "Ow, ow, ow, ouch." It didn't stop to find out who. Jason, meanwhile, was getting nicely into his rhythm. He had split the helmet of authority, sliced the thunderbolts into mortadella, shattered the breastplate of power, and was just about to make an end of it when... "Jason!" said a voice behind him. "You stop that immediately, you hear me?" Jason sighed very, very deeply and lowered his sword. "Yes, Mum," he said. "So now you see." Jason nodded. He supposed that it made sense after a fashion, or at least if it didn't absolutely make sense, it was at least less glaringly nonsensical than a lot of things which passed for components of that great pile of unwashed laundry known for convenience as the truth. Perhaps a better way of looking at it was that if it wasn't true, it was at least what all the protagonists believed to be true. In such circumstances as these, Jason was beginning to realise that an untruth tends to become indistinguishable from the real thing simply through the action of protective mimicry. "Well then," he said, "did you get all that, Mum?" "No," said Mrs. Derry. Jason sighed. He would have to explain. Look, he said, what Prometheus was saying was that the reason why it was... Language, Jason realised, was a large part of the problem because words say what they want to say, not what you want them to say. Why it was fated from the start that I'd be the only one who would, stand up to Dad and sort all this lot out. He paused. Somewhere his sentences wrapped itself around his legs like a fast-moving dog on a long lead. The reason why it had to be me, he ventured, is that, well, in the beginning there was this word, right?
I think what Jason's trying to say, Prometheus interrupted, is that Jason is unique in history because I have more of one particular quality than anyone else who's ever been. And it was this quality, this power, that was required in order to make the whole thing work.
Oh, yes, said Mrs. Derry, politely. She had only the vaguest notion who this tall man was, and she wasn't sure she liked him. But he seemed to be saying that her son was a very special and important person, and she agreed with that. Like all mothers, she had known that from the very beginning, but it was nice to find someone who agreed with her.
Let me put it this way, Prometheus said. Some people say that love is the most powerful force in the universe. Well, you can take it from me that it isn't. Others say, rather more plausibly, that it's fear, greed, hope or faith that makes the world go round. They're wrong too. As for those who say that what fuels and drives the universe is the laws of physics, all I can say is that they're living in a world of their own. No, the most powerful and significant force in the universe, the one thing that gets things done and makes things happen, is aggravation.
Aggravation?
Aggravation. Why is it, do you think, that all the little atoms move about within their molecules, bashing into each other like so many Christmas shoppers and creating the effect known to scientists as Brownian motion? Is it love, do you think, or fear, or belief in the supreme being? Like hell it is. The plain truth of the matter is that if you put more than 2 or 3 atoms together in a confined space for any length of time, sooner or later they're going to get on each other's wick, and then they start hurling themselves about and colliding with each other. They also shout a lot, but since the science of physics is in its infancy, nobody has yet constructed an instrument sensitive enough to monitor the voices of millions of tiny atoms debating with each other whose turn it is to do the washing up. Probably just as well, if you ask me.
I see, lied Mrs. Derry. But what's that got to do with...
When Gellos and I, Prometheus went on, came to the conclusion that something was going to have to be done about Jupiter if he wasn't going to get completely out of hand, we realised that the only thing powerful enough to stand up to him was a really massive dose of raw aggravation. Faith wasn't enough. It would just about be possible if the world was allowed to lie fallow, if you like, for 1,000-odd years, so it could build its faith reserves up to the maximum, to generate a faith field strong enough to repel Jupiter once. But it could only be once. After that, he would be able to come back once he'd licked his wounds and found another Betamax world to replace the one Jason disposed of for us. Have another go. No, somebody was going to have to sort out Jupiter himself, and for that purpose only aggravation would do. So we set about creating the perfect aggravation conductor. We designed Jason.
Well, said Mrs. Derry, that's fascinating, and now Jason and I must be getting along. Come on, Jason.
The specifications, Prometheus continued, were for a hero who was at least as big, as strong, and as brave as one of the all-time big 3, Hercules, Theseus, and Achilles. In other words, a son of Jupiter, but who had spent his entire life being put upon, shoved about, and generally pushed around. That way we could build up the necessary reservoir of aggravation. And then, when the time was right, we could prime it, so to speak, by letting him know just to what extent he'd been pushed around all these years, and further by giving him the impression that not just his mother and father, but everyone on all sides had been using him as a sort of human combination hammer, tin opener, and malt wrench. Finally, we would put him in a position of enormous stress and fail him. That was what all the nonsense with the dog was for. There's no way we would have dared entrust the joke or any part of it to him, let alone to a 3-headed dog. We just let him think we had. We set him up good and proper. I'm sorry about that, Jason.
That's all right. Jason said automatically. He had in fact been intending to pull Prometheus' head off and use it as a football ever since the truth of the matter dawned on him at that crucial moment when Cerberus had disappeared. Somehow, though, now it came to it, he wasn't in the mood.
So what? Anyway, Prometheus said, we all saw what happened. Jupiter never knew what hit him. The combination of Jason's irritation and his own massive aggravation build-up, caused by the failure of his attack on Earth, led to the most almighty outburst of pure, undiluted aggro, and Jupiter just fused out. It was like putting a vastly excessive current through a 5-amp plug. Jason, of course, is a superb natural conductor of aggravation, and so it just went through him like water through a pipe.
There was a long silence. "What you mean is," Mrs. Derry said at last, "our Jason saved the world."
"Exactly," Prometheus said. "He lost his cool and thereby saved the world."
"And what about Dad?" Jason asked. "Not that I'm at all bothered, not after what he was going to do to me, well, to all of us really, but—"
"You mustn't blame him," Prometheus said. "The sad truth is that Jupiter's been more or less off his rocker for a very long time now. Pretty well ever since I stole the first joke from heaven all those years ago. You see, unlike most of the gods, he actually did care about the world, and misguidedly, in my opinion, he felt very strongly that in order to survive, mortals need an unshakable faith in the gods. When I snookered him on that score, there was a huge build-up of aggro inside him, and as we've seen, he just can't handle it. Something gave way inside his head, and he's been missing on at least 2 cylinders ever since. What's happened today has, I'm afraid, finally done for the poor old devil. His supreme being days are well and truly over, I fear."
"Then what's going to happen?" Jason asked. "Does that mean that Thing is going to take over?"
"Perish the thought," Prometheus replied. "That would be a very serious mistake, and Thing knows it. He's going back into retirement where he belongs, going to write a novel, he tells me, and I wish him the very best of luck. No, what we've decided on is that Jupiter will carry on as supreme being in name only, with Apollo as a sort of prince-regent. That way, pole being pole, the gods will spend all their time bickering with each other, and they'll leave the mortals in peace. It'll mean the end of the game, for one thing, and that can't be bad."
"What game?" Jason asked.
"And if Apollo ever does show any signs of getting above himself,"
Prometheus went on,
"then we'll have Mrs. Apollo to keep him under control."
"Mrs. Apollo?"
"Mary," Prometheus explained. "As you know better than anyone, the only thing capable of dominating a male with unlimited physical strength is a female with a comparable amount of mental strength. I don't think it'll take Mary very long to get Apollo properly trained. Do you?"
"Oh," said Jason. "So Mary's—"
"Yes," Prometheus replied. "It's not what was fated, I know. But you take it from me, you've had a very lucky escape there. Bear in mind that Mary is also your Sharon."
"Ah, yes," said Jason. "That's a very good point. Thank you."
"Well then,"
Prometheus yawned and stretched. The sun was starting to sink behind the Caucasus Mountains. In the distance, Apollo and Mary were going for a quiet stroll, talking pleasantly of this and that. A couple of forms in white coats were trying their best to persuade Jupiter that it was safe to come down from his tree.
"That more or less wraps it up, then," Prometheus said. "Thanks for everything, Jason. We couldn't have done it without you. Or rather, you couldn't have done it without us."
"Will the world be a better place?" Jason asked. Prometheus shook his head.
"I doubt it," he said. "It always amazes me the way the old place quickly gets back to normal, no matter what you do to try and improve it. No, you can make it worse, no problem, but it's virtually impossible to improve it. I tried. Remember, I gave them fire, and yet millions of people are still cold. I taught them agriculture, and millions of them are still starving. I gave them laughter, and yet the majority of them are still as miserable as income tax. I can only imagine it's how they like it, deep down."
"And what are you going to do?" Jason asked.
"Me?" Prometheus grinned. "I'm going to have a holiday. What the hell do you think? After that, I don't know. I might have a shot at sorting out the gods a bit more, but I doubt it. Anyway, I mustn't keep you any longer. Thanks again."
He smiled and then grew, until they lost sight of his head, then his body, and then finally his kneecaps in the clouds. And then he simply wasn't there anymore. And Jason and Mrs. Derry discovered that what they were actually looking at was a mountain. "Right," said Mrs. Derry. "Let's be getting home. I could do with a cup of tea, and you could do with a bath." "Mum, a bath," Mrs. Derry repeated, "and no arguments." "But, Mum, I had one this morning." "Jason," said Mrs. Derry. Just then a helicopter appeared in the sky. In it were Betty Lou Fisicelli and her agent, a camera crew, and a glass tank containing a frog. The frog seemed agitated, and Ms. Fisicelli was doing her best to comfort it by saying that it was going to be all right, that Apollo would soon turn him back into human shape, and then give him the most incredibly historic interview of all time, just so long as he minded his manners and promised never to coin the phrase Olympusgate as long as he lived. The frog lashed out at the glass wall of its prison once or twice with its hind legs, and said "rivet" bitterly, and then nodded its head. "It's been a long day," said Mrs. Derry. "Did you understand what that man was saying about aggravation and your dad and all that?" Jason considered for a moment. For the first time in his life he had a vague, shadowy idea of what was going on. It was the beginning of wisdom. "No," he said. "Good, here's George with the cart. Come on, ma'am, in you get." In his Learjet, 30,000 feet above Nebraska, Mr. Courtwright was speaking to Nostradamus on blue. "It's a neat idea, sure," he said, "and I like it in principle. But you've got to ask yourself, maybe you're aiming your stuff at the wrong slice of the market, okay? I mean, do the people really want to know about Napoleon? Do they really give a 2-cent fuck about the advent of nuclear war? That sort of thing just kind of depresses people, Noz, you know? Why do I have to be so goddamn gloomy?" There was an agitated buzzing sound from the end of the wire. Courtwright sighed, murmured something about maybe having lunch Thursday, and replaced the receiver. He ate a pickled onion. "Odin for you unread, Mr. Courtwright." Courtwright swallowed a few shreds of peel and picked up the phone. "Odin," he said, "how's tricks? Afraid you missed the boat again this time, but we'll keep trying for you. You know that." The receiver turned into a serpent in his hand, and Courtwright put a broad, friendly smile on his face. Nobody likes having a disgruntled client. "Look, I've been thinking," he said. "What we need for you is a brand new vehicle. You know, launch you from an entirely different angle. I mean, we've tried blood and human sacrifice and all that. How about making you, well, cuddlier, you know?" said Courtwright, keeping a straight face in spite of himself. "Lovable. We could say you originally came here from another planet and you got stranded, and we're trying to fix it so you can go home." The serpent glowed blue and sprouted another head. Courtwright made a comforting gesture with his hands. Okay, he said soothingly. "We'll put that one on ice for now. What you really need," he went on, "is a gospel." There was an interested hiss from the serpent. Courtwright thought for a moment and then smiled. "With a good gospel," he said, "we could go places with you. We could get sponsorship, you know, commercial backing. We could make the big time." The serpent coiled itself round Courtwright's ankle and started to eat his shoelaces. This was, the agent told himself, a good sign. "How about something like this?" he said. "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was Kawaguchi Integrated Circuits, and all rights in the Word were reserved, so that unauthorized publication thereof in any form of cover or binding or electronic data retrieval system other than that supplied by the publisher rendered the user liable to civil and criminal prosecution." The serpent bit him.